Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to our presentation of the 10th anniversary of Ipsos Global Trends, the Canadian edition. My name is Diane Ridgway Cross, and I'm Canadian lead of Ipsos Strategy 3, Ipsos's in-house growth consultancy. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Mike College, who's president and ESG lead for Ipsos, and
Hello.
Charles Leach, who's SVP leading Ipsos's qualitative team. Hi,
Thank you,
Charles.
Diane. Yeah, good to see you all.
Good to see you. So let me tell you a little bit about Ipsos Global Trends. It is our unique point of view on what people around the world are thinking, feeling, and doing right now. But beyond being a report or analysis, it's a real resource that you can use, that we certainly use in a myriad of ways. We have a decade of data to reflect on, and it really paints a powerful picture on where we've been, where we are today, and where we're headed. And it's exciting because this is one of the largest, most in-depth studies of its kind. We surveyed 50,000 people across 50 markets, covering 3/4 of the world's population, identifying the most critical macro forces and trends across all sectors to find out how people are feeling and what's on the horizon. To help us understand the world, we've built a framework that we call our theory of change at Ipsos. Macro forces, which you see on the left-hand side in the teal, really are those things that are affecting everyone all around the world. So think about things like climate change, the invention of generative AI, demography changes. So those are one part of the picture. In the middle, you see shifts that are happening in society, in markets, and people. And then on the right, you see the signals of change. And what those really are the signals that we're seeing out in the world that are demonstrating that things are happening. And we kind of look at this as this very virtuous loop because they're all impacting each other. And through looking through all of these things, we're able to develop our 9 trends. Our study pulls together 5 million data points, an analysis, like I said, of macro forces and signals, and we identified 9 trends and 23 underlying values that I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to kind of do let's say a 30,000 foot view for you and talk about the 9 trends that we focus on. And then we're going to kind of double click down into 5 of those trends and we'll talk about those. The first trend is globalization fractures, and that's really about the push and pull between the global society and economy that we all live in versus the rise of nationalism and localism that we're feeling. Sorry. The next trend is splintered societies. It's about where the rising divisions within societies and how divisions are becoming even larger than differences in really between countries, just that we're seeing in our individual cultures. We're certainly seeing this play out with our southern neighbors right now and really all over the world. The third trend is climate convergence, and that really explores the fact that we've gotten to a place where everyone on the planet agrees that we're at a clear and present danger if we don't address the climate crisis soon, but we really don't agree on how to solve it. The fourth trend, conscientious health, explores how health as a topic has been really on the rise since COVID-19, and it looks at people's interest in their overall well-being with a kind of a rising focus on our mental health. The next sixth trend is retreat to old systems. And that explains how, as things are really getting more stressful, people tend to retreat to the familiar. And we're seeing this all over the world. The seventh trend is nouveau nihilism. And this is a new trend for us. And it's about that feeling that, if the world is just all too overwhelming, you'll never be able to get the job that you want. You'll never be able to buy the house you want. Perhaps you just say, you know what, forget it all and start living for the day, right? Trusting that things will work out in the long run. So really interesting trend that's happening and really accelerating. The eighth trend is the power of trust. And it's really driven by the world that we live in right now that has too much information and way too much disinformation. And it's hard to know who or what you can trust. But for the brands that actually have earned people's trust, it becomes all the more powerful because it's in such short supply. And finally, our last trend is escape to individualism. And it's a really interesting trend that's really born out of this feeling that while you may not be able to control or change the world, you can really count on yourself. And we'll talk about that a bit later. But before we dive in, I want to take kind of a view from 30,000 feet because I want to set the stage with some data about how Canadians are feeling about the next 12 months and about the country as a whole. So when we ask Canadians, are they feeling optimistic or pessimistic about themselves and around the things around them? We really see kind of an interesting story. I'm going to build this bar chart. And you see, when we ask people, are you optimistic or pessimistic about you and your family? You see that top purple bar, 62% of Canadians say they're optimistic about the next 12 months for themselves and their family. But then when we open up the aperture a little bit and we ask them, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the city, town, or village where you live? You see this marked decrease down to 49% who say they're optimistic about the city, town, or village where they live. We see still further a decline when we ask the same question about their country, when we see only 35% of Canadians saying, looking ahead at the next 12 months, I'm optimistic about our country. And then it kind of falls off the edge of the cliff, if you will, when we ask people about the world in general. We say, looking ahead the next 12 months, only 19% of Canadians say they're feeling optimistic. And on the contrast, you see 50% saying they feel pessimistic about the next 12 months. So that really kind of leans into and leads to some of the trends, and you'll feel some of that tension in the data that we share. The other thing I want to talk about just for a minute is about how people are feeling about the country that we live in. Here we see data from 2019 that tells us that 76% of Canadians back in 2019 agreed that they felt very proud of their country. Fast forward 5 years to 2024, and that number plummets to 58% of Canadians agreeing that they feel very proud. So we see a marked decrease as people are still starting to feel less positive about their country and being proud of it. And when we look at the number on the other side, we see 31% of Canadians actually disagreeing with that statement and saying, no, I disagree with the fact that I feel very proud of my country. So I think that's really interesting. It has real implications for brands that wrap themselves in their Canadianness. And Mike, I think you've got a little bit of context on this that I'd love for you to share.
Yeah, I think it's not so much that the drop from 76 to 58 isn't because well, the country's done some horrible things, so I feel less proud because of our actions. It's we've come a little bit detached. Now you're going to talk about splintered societies in a bit, and we've come a little bit detached from the country, a little bit detached from each other, and we're more, as the slide before showed, we're more optimistic about local things and the areas we can control. We're also more interested in the benefits at the local level and the focus, right? So while the world's globalized, we're really concerned about our backyard. So we used to run out stats to say the economy's going great across the country. The response in Red Deer, St. Thomas, Halifax is, well, what's job numbers like here? Because that's what my concern is, right? I think it's great that the country's doing well at the macro level, but my neighbor's got a 27-year-old who lives in his basement and he can't find work. Same thing with, subjects like immigration, healthcare services. We can talk about the pan-Canadian experience, but people really want to know what's happening in their backyard. So we are proud of our communities. We're proud of our neighborhoods, our families, but we're starting to lose a little bit of that connection to the broader Canadian environment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that around in a lot of countries around the world. So we're not an outlier in that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about 5 trends that we've curated for you today. We'll talk about splintered societies, climate convergence, techno wonder, conscientious health, and the escape to individualism. I think I'm up first to talk about splintered societies, and we really like to talk about this trend first in a lot of our talks because it's pretty foundational. It's continue of the topic that we were just talking about to understanding the cultural context that we live and operate in. Much of the world is really witnessing a backlash to immigration vocal differences in personal values, political values, continued disparity in equality and equity. And Canada just isn't immune. And then when you add into that some of the financial disparities, the wealth disparities, when we look at this fact that tells us that 0.01% of the richest people in the world own 12% of the world's total wealth, we're really seeing this increasing world of haves and have-nots. And as societies around the world begin to age and begin to shrink, tensions are going to continue to grow as we see these haves and have-nots. The first topic I want to talk about really is this idea of discrimination. And I think as Canadians, we often believe that we hover above a lot of these issues, but the data doesn't really prove that out. When we ask people, Canadians, if they're discriminated against because of their gender, 1 in 4, so 27% tell us that I am often discriminated against because of my gender. 27% of Canadian women say that, and they say often discriminated against. And I think that's pretty striking that here we are in 2024 and we're still looking at those kinds of numbers in gender discrimination. You see a particular age skew in this where you see the 16 to 24-year-olds saying that they feel discriminated against because of their gender. So something going on there. We ask a similar question and we see that also 27% of Canadians agree I'm often discriminated against because of my age. Again, we see that age skew where 41% of 16 to 24-year-olds say that they feel like they're discriminated against because of their age. 19% of Canadians agree that they're often discriminated against because of the color of their skin. Once again, we see an age skew there. And then finally, 19% of Canadians agree that I'm often discriminated against because of my sexual orientation. And again, you see this age skew that really can't be ignored of what our youth and young adults are feeling, this sense of otherness. And discrimination is contributes to the splintering of society, and it has a range of profound effects, from difficulty in finding jobs to differences, in equal opportunities to mental health, emotional health, physical well-being. So definitely an issue that is driving the splintering of society. On the topic of immigration, I think, as I said, there's historically been this kind of thought of this as a debate in other countries and not here, but we've seen a rapid turnaround in the attitudes of Canadians about the government's changing politics and policies around the topic. Here we see that more than half of Canadians say that immigration has a positive impact on society in my country. So positive sign. On the other side, we see 55% of Canadians saying that they agree that there are too many immigrants in our country. And this is really a dramatic shift. We've seen, like I said, we've long been this country that's taken pride in welcoming newcomers. We all know that, but we're seeing a growing slice of our population believing that Canada just has too many immigrants, and many blaming immigrants for issues like the worsening housing crisis, the surge in the cost of living, lack of access to healthcare resources. We really, honestly, Canadians haven't felt this strongly about immigration in a quarter century. And we call this the dinner table divider. This is the first time that we've asked this question. And 41% of Canadians agree that in my family, there is more and more conflict between relatives who don't share the same values. And you see the skew from age, where from the age 16 to 44, you see really feeling those wedges between people in their families. And when we think about splintered societies and all this going on, it's important to realize that Canadians want businesses and leaders to help address these issues. 80% of Canadians agree that businesses have a duty to contribute to society, not just to make profits. And 65% of Canadians say that business leaders have a responsibility to speak out on social and political issues affecting the country. So sometimes I know that there's a lot of discourse right now about whether or not there's place to talk about that, and many companies and businesses and brands are reining back on that. But 2/3 of Canadians say that it's still important to speak out on topics. For every trend, we end up looking at market signals around the world to really give us a sense of how these trends are playing out. So I'm going to talk about three of them that show us how brands are addressing splintered societies. The first one is a Spanish neobank called Equalo, who provides immigrants in Europe who might lack the type of documentation typically required to really conduct financial business. It's an in-app identity verification service that allows people to open an account with just their passport. So really, really bridging that gap and getting rid of some of that inequity in the financial market. This second example is actually from the Netherlands, and it's called Refugees for Climate Transition. It's a company called The Switch who has set up a program to recruit and train refugees to help them overcome a significant shortfall in skilled engineers and workers to help with the energy transition. So you talk about taking a challenge and making it an opportunity. That's a great opportunity there to make that work for them. And then the third market signal we're watching is really about leveraging AI to eliminate recruitment bias. So there's a company called Recruit Assist that's using AI to blind screen candidates that helps reduce unconscious bias and helps hiring teams make smarter, faster, and more equitable hiring decisions. Lots of good stuff happening out there. I think our counsel for you as marketers is really to understand the issues that you can impact because you can't impact everything. So understand what your lane is and then figure out how you can create content, you can create products, you can do the things that will help reach across divides and heal divisions. I'm going to turn it over to Mike to talk about climate convergence.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm going to talk about climate, but a lot of this could be applied to the environment in general. And climate is really it's a very important issue that lacks somewhat of urgency. Not that people don't think we need to move fast, but because we haven't provided solutions. We are converging, and we talk about that because a lot of groups are converging. Investors want to know their risks, so they're demanding reporting. Businesses are starting to look for more sustainable practices because it's good for their businesses. Brands, NGOs, financial institutions, citizens are all coming to the realization that we need to do something, and we need to do something fairly quickly, but leaving us some big questions, for citizens, individuals, consumers, how fast are you willing to change and what are you willing to change your lifestyle? And then more globally, who's going to lead? Because, while there's a shared responsibility and we can find a little bit for everybody, we haven't really found sort of its business or its government or its individuals. So we're sort of grappling with that right now. You go to the next slide, please. What we're really seeing, I think, is a bit of an environmental collision course. If you look in the middle, you mentioned it, and I talked about earlier, 7 and 10, pretty unanimous numbers or large majorities, we're heading for an environmental disaster unless we change our habits quickly. We need to shift, we need to move. Look to the left, almost 6 and 10. I'm already doing everything that I can to save the environment. People say this, but we know from our data and other surveys we've done that they're really fooling themselves. When we ask people what you can do, what actions they're taking, they're not taking a lot of actions. And the actions that they are taking aren't the most effective. So their pushback is, well, it's got to be business responsibility. It's got to be government responsibility because I'm already doing everything that I can. Then if you flip to the right, almost a dead split. I don't even think there's an effective action that will slow the pace of climate change. 30 years almost since Al Gore ran out his documentary. And what we've done is come to a consensus and a convergence that something is happening and we need to do something about it. But we are dead split on whether there is something that can do it. And then when we get to actions, we can't agree that those are the right actions. We can't agree to what to do, what to put in the window, which is why we're struggling to see carbon taxes hold on around the world as a policy lever. We go to the next slide, please. If we just fill all these up for our brands, for people looking to go out and engage and have conversations about this, I think it's really important to recognize that we don't all see climate change, environmental issues, ESG in general through the same lens. This is the segmentation that we run. We ran it in Global Trends in 50 countries, but many of our clients are using it now to look at how they talk and they're segmenting their consumers. It really is a measure of activation and how people feel about it, with the least active on the left, the most active on the right. So I'm going to start with the least active, the disengaged distancers. 21% of the Canadian population, and yes, to your questions around people thinking, I wonder what that is in the US, it's 31%. So more, but these aren't deniers. These aren't people who say, I don't believe in science. They're not fully that. There's probably 8, 9% in there. But there's a lot of people like, I'm going to swipe left when it gets to climate change because I'm just not interested in it. I'm not following it. I'm not focused on it. Really hard to reach because they're not listening. On the flip side, activists, they're already doing things. They're already walking more. They're already, living carless. They're already making those decisions because it's so important to them. People are saying, those great. They're activists. A lot of our clients come and say, that's the low hanging fruit. Can we talk to them? How can we sell to them? What can we do to them? Guess what? They're also anti capitalist. They're not big on business. They're not all that super fond of products and consumerism, right? So, yeah, there's an opportunity to reach there. And they're younger and they don't have a lot of money. So let's focus on the middle three groups, who are a bigger group, who are older, have money, and you actually can reach them. 29%, the biggest group in Canadians, and there's some evidence that that group is growing. There's some shift from other segments into that segment in Canada. I'm going to do enough. This is me. Let's say I'm going to do enough just so that Charles and Diane don't call me out on my environmental practice. I'm going to get over the bare minimum so that I look okay. But I'm not super engaged. I'm not really focused on it. But I'm going to just do what's socially acceptable and great. And then the other two groups, discerning realists, busy, focused. They have kids, they have money, but you got to make this thing fit in their lifestyle. They'll do it as long as it doesn't require an extra 40 minutes to go get the kids from soccer because that's not on for them. They're too busy. It doesn't work for them, so it doesn't work for the environment. And then the other group, 11% willing contributors. I should point out both the discerning realists and willing contributors are willing to spend more in this area. The willing contributors, 11%, they're very pragmatic. What they want to know is it actually works. If you show me the KPI, show me the numbers, show me that by doing X, I will reduce my carbon footprint by Y, prove it to me, and I'm likely to pony up the money to make it happen. So all to say, as our clients start to think about this, there's not a Canadian population or a Canadian view on climate change and how I view it. Look through these 5 segments and these lenses. It's super important to think about that. We
I
go to the
think
next
I'm
one.
I think
Go
I'm
ahead.
an activist emotionally, but a discerning realist by behavior.
Well, it's funny because when I ask this in sessions that I'm walking through, everybody in the room says, "Oh, I'm an activist," right? But we know they're not unless we're just getting a very skewed room every time. So,
Yeah, yeah.
what's the result? Some of the pressure on government. 75% of Canadians agree companies aren't paying enough attention. Similar numbers, 71% say company impacts on the environment should be more controlled by my government. We're going to see more and more efforts by governments who are seen as ineffective in a number of areas, leaning on companies, right? We also know that I think it's around 72% of Canadians say reporting on carbon footprints for companies is a good thing and will actually reduce climate change. That's part of consumers wanting more information. They recognize there's more information out there. They'll be able to see it, choose it. There'll be some guilt among companies and moving forward. We're actually seeing some litigation right now. Ontario's top courts looking into a new hearing for a youth-led group, a constitutional challenge that sort of the current emissions targets in Ontario are violating the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So we're going to start to see more legal action. We see more regulation because the public want it and they want to put pressure on business to move forward. And governments who have grappled with real things like we can't get a carbon tax through are going to look for how can we achieve our goals through business. So some of the things we're looking at. The first one here, I think this is a cool one. IKEA, the CEO for Canada and IKEA is also the chief sustainability officer. So you can see the level of priority they put on it. This is IKEA. They held a summit called One Home, One Planet. Not only are they saying they're doing their part, but they're trying to engage in a bigger conversation with academics, activists, business around how do we increase recycling? How do we promote a circular economy? This is a really good example of where they're trying to leverage what they're doing. They're trying to elevate the conversation, expand their goodwill, strengthen their reputation. And it really, how can we part of this bigger picture? I think it's a cool initiative. You go to the next one. Canada's greenwashing regulations under the Competition Bureau. We aren't the only country that's passed these kind of legislation, but what we're seeing around the world is the impact of these greenwashing legislations. We're seeing sustainable reports that are less about KPIs and promises and more about action and accomplishments, which is a good thing. I think we're actually going to go from sort of longer term promises to things we've actually accomplished. But we're also seeing green hushing. We're also seeing clients say, we're doing a lot on sustainability. We're moving forward, but we're not going to talk about it because we're worried we're going to get sued because of the greenwashing rules. And that's a bad thing because what we need to do right now, I think, is actually have good stories, show that progress is made because we have, as you saw earlier, that 41% say I just don't think there's anything we can do. We need to show people that we can make progress. The EU actually just came out with a study a couple days ago that they actually dropped in 2023 their carbon footprint significantly for the first time in a long time, which is a great story to tell. But we need more stories at the product level, at the brand level, at the consumer level, what we can do. And then finally, I think this is a great one. Uber's one less car initiative, $1,000 in cash or presumably Uber credits to park your car for 5 weeks. Makes you think about what you would do without your car. But obviously, if you do it, that's fantastic. But even if you don't do it, it makes you think about sort of what would I do without my car? What kind of lifestyle change would I have to make? Sort of really puts it on the agenda. It ties with what they do, and that's really important for tying it to their reputation. But it also sort of pushes that into how we can model it for people. The next slide. So I really think that, you know what, I didn't talk a lot about technology because my friend Charles is going to talk about technology, but the other aspect of climate change is the role of technology in making it cheaper and making it more available and making it something that can be more reachable at the consumer level, right? So really, how do we get down to things you can do? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Charles on Techno Wonder.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, let's talk about technology and techno wonder, which is another one of these pervasive things that surrounds us and penetrates just about everything that we do all the time. And this section starts off with this interesting idea of awe and how all of us are pretty much in awe of the technology that surrounds us and the role that it plays. And awe is a really interesting emotion because it's one of the very few, if not the only truly mixed emotion that we ever suffer, because awe is the balanced combination of terror and joy. When you put terror and joy together, you get awe. And it usually comes out when we feel we're in the presence of something much bigger and much stronger than we are, which of course is exactly what technology is. So there's a lot of wonder with technology, a lot of positivity. It does marvelous things for us and we rely on it, but there's also a lot of worry, a lot of concern, specifically about mental health, about the impact on our careers. There's some artistic concern there. There's a growing belief that all the benefits that we can and do see with technology come at a cost, and the cost is something we're increasingly aware of, and we're having now to have those conversations about whether we're willing to pay the cost for the benefits that technology is giving us. So we'll give you some numbers on that. There's several here, and most of them reflect a growing disease. And that's not disease and getting sick, but the absence of being ease with the role that technology is playing. So this is a recent one. This is 2024. 58% of Canadians agreeing that we need modern technology because it can help to solve future problems. So obviously that's more than half, but it's considerably under the global average, which is at 71%. So we're a little bit more pessimistic in Canada than the global average on how technology is actually going to help us rather than harm us. We then have some comparisons, I think, on the next slide. So starting in 2013, so this is now several years ago, 42% Canadians agree that technological progress is destroying our lives. And that, of course, changes when you leap forward 11 years to the present, where now 58% of us agree that technological progress is destroying our lives. And that's genuine fear we have, which is a marked increase in concern and fear about technology and the impact that it has on us. You can see the gender split down there at the bottom. And in fact, 67% of us who are 16 to 24, so here are the young people speaking here, they're the ones who are concerned deeply that technological progress is destroying our lives. You might think intuitively that the younger you are, the more likely you are to embrace technology and feel that it's improving your life. In fact, the numbers tell us no, not the case. They're actually quite concerned that it's having a negative impact on them. They see, I think, the downside of it even more clearly than older generations. Let's flip on. This is interesting too to see where we sit in the overall global span of all the countries in terms of our concern about how technological progress might be harming us. There we are right in the very middle at 58% agreeing between the US and Great Britain. And of course, at one end of the spectrum, we have Egypt and Morocco, who are the most concerned. And then the people at the very other end of the spectrum who are the least concerned in Nigeria and China. Part of this is a 73% concern about how data is being used by governments and companies, which again is a very large number. 67% are concerned about the role that those organizations are playing with how they're using our data. And then 78% of us agree that it's inevitable that we're going to lose more privacy moving forward. So again, a very pessimistic picture of where we're headed with the role that technology is playing in those particular areas. AI, of course, is now also everywhere. A huge discourse in the public sphere about AI. We see it pop up and impact just about every aspect of our lives. Is it good? Is it bad? We're still trying to figure that out. Part of the uncertainty around AI, I think, has got to do with the sheer speed at which it's developing. It seems like every week there's new developments. There's ever growing promises of increasing efficiency and speed with new models that come out. It seems to be very difficult to get a handle on how that's growing exponentially. This is quite a low number. Only 31% of Canadians agree that on balance, technological advances like AI will create more jobs than they will destroy. So it's a optimistic statement, but only 31% of us agree with it, which means on average, the majority of us think that's simply not true. And the same here, 39% of us agree that AI is having a positive impact in the world that we live in, which means, again, a majority of us disagree. Compare that to the global averages in both those cases, so 48% and 57% globally. We are well under the global average for optimism versus pessimism on how AI is going to impact us. And then there's a generational split, which you can see here, as we alluded to before. 53% of 18 to 24-year-olds think that AI is having a positive impact. So that's only half, fraction over. And then that starts to steadily descend towards the 55 to 74-year-olds, where 56% of that age cohort disagree that AI is having a positive impact. They see very much more of the negative than they see the positive. Right? We do seem to be caught in a tech trap with the internet and with social media. Some of us here on the call were old enough to remember life before the internet, but of course there are many generations who simply can't imagine that at all. But all of us, you know, in total, 67% of us, 69% of us agree that now, today, we can't imagine life without the internet. For better or for worse, it's become very much an embedded part of our life. And so what is the internet? How does that play out? A large part of it is smartphone interaction. So about half of us agree that we are trying to limit the use of our smartphone these days, which means we're seeing the downside to smartphone usage and are aware of those dangers. So there's a very active movement towards that. And then, of course, a big part of smartphone usage is social media usage and social media impact. And only 37% of Canadians agree that on balance, social media companies are having a positive impact on our life. So again, a very positive, optimistic statement, but only 37% of us agree with that. Most of us clearly feel the opposite. So what are some of the signals we're watching in this particular world that give us some of these cues? Again, three interesting things to point out quickly. One is a consortium that's being led by Cisco, Microsoft, and Google to really look at the impact that AI has on job loss and job creation. So they're obviously, these are very large companies, very much invested in this space, but they are clearly aware that this is the big concern around AI. Is it going to take my job? Will my kids have jobs in the future? So they're devoting a lot of time and energy into that. There's a fascinating product that we've got our eye on, which is called the Punkt phone. I love pronouncing the T on the end of that. It's a very gratifying thing to do. This is a return to minimalism in phone technology. It's only about, I think, $300, so it's $1,000 less than whatever the latest iPhone is going to be. And really, it does one thing, and that is phone calls. Actually, not true. It does two things. It sends text messages. But what it doesn't do is access the internet. It doesn't give you any social media. It doesn't give you emojis. It doesn't give you graphics. It doesn't give you icons. All of those things simply don't come with this package at all. It's got a battery life. I think, Mike, you and I were laughing about it. It's got like a 20-day battery life.
Super long, yeah. Lasts
super
forever.
long. easily long enough for you to forget where your charging cables are and have to look for them all over again, unlike most of us with our regular phones. And then thirdly, just on the end here, also a super fascinating thing. Most of us will remember Dove's very famous campaign about keeping beauty real, award-winning, best-in-class campaign. Anybody with even a peripheral interest in marketing will be aware of how successful this has been. They are taking a new stance with how AI is now causing some concern about how beauty is being manifest through artificial intelligence, and sending us straight back into the beauty myth, again, without us even knowing that we're being affected. So they've got their eye on this. They're taking a stance on that. Their whole campaign is now oriented towards taking AI out of advertising illustrations in order to keep beauty real.
I love that. It's so important. I'm so happy they've made that move.
Especially because it's increasingly difficult to tell. So
Yep.
as marketers, what should we be doing? Again, a pretty straightforward thing. We know that technology will continue to play a really important role in our brands and in our companies. So we can't really avoid that or sidestep it. So we need to build trust and education with people on those benefits of technology. And the benefits do exist, but doing that at the same time as easing concerns over privacy, over disinformation, and security, because those are very real concerns and very much in the forefront of a lot of our consumers' minds. And then, of course, the stress of that is very real. And the stress of that and the anxiety of that leads us very neatly into the next topic, which is conscientious health. And I'm going to conscientious health. So, Mike, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Easy for you to say.
Yes, I'm going to avoid saying it because now that you've said it, I'll get it wrong. This is really, but I will use some alliteration. This is really about concern, control, and connectivity. So what we see is rising concern around our health. Why do we see it? One, we're an aging society, and that's a concern. Two, we're seeing health systems get weaker and weaker, so that's a worry for us. Control, as we get older, we want to live better. We've talked about this desire for agency. You're going to talk about this a little bit more, Charles, I know. So we want to take control, and then connectivity. We actually have these very cool tools now called watches that connect us in a whole new range and monitor our health, tells us our heartbeat, tells us when we're breathing, tells us when to drink water, a whole range of things that quite possibly maybe cause some of our mental health concerns because we're looking every now and then going, oh, my heartbeat is up. So all these things are combining to really change how we think about health and healthcare. If we go to the next slide, please. We've wanted control over health for a long time. It was 71% pre-pandemic. It's 74% now. People saying, I would like more control decisions over my health. That makes sense. We've got more information. What's interesting for me is post-pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, when we ask questions, Canadians saying, do you agree, disagree? I need to do more to look after my physical well-being or my mental well-being. The gap pre-pandemic was 83% and 69% physical and mental. That's close to 78 and 74%. They're pretty much on par, very close to the margin of error, so pretty much equal. We put those on par. However, we have a health system that skews about 80% to the physical, which leaves potentially a huge gap. Where do you get your mental health services? It's not from the state if it's more focused on the physical. And an opportunity for marketers and for businesses to step in, an opportunity, maybe even a requirement for employers to think about how they close the mental health gap for their employees, but a real potential gap and some challenges going forward as we raise both of those up. And we know from some of the conversations we had earlier about the world getting busier and busier and the challenges that it doesn't look like these mental health challenges are going to go away. So go to the next slide, please. I won't spend a lot of time on this. This is really the demographic break for the question. I always try and find out information on healthcare by myself rather than relying on what my doctor tells me. What's interesting for this is two things for me. Is one, if you look at the age groups, let's throw out the youngest age group, the 18 to 24s, because we really don't quite get that engaged in our healthcare until we get a little bit older into our 30s. But look at the 72, 69% of that younger, those two younger generations from 25 to 44, who are actively out there trying to find out information and taking control of their health, looking for information, and look to the far end, the higher education groups. So what is the potential gap developing here where lower educated Canadians have a harder time finding information? So you could find a scenario where, you know, some people are getting better healthcare than others because they can access information, have the wherewithal, greater health literacy. If we go to the next slide, this is the I need to do more to look after my mental well-being question. Again, look at the breaks. It's the middle income or the middle age groups, 25 to sort of 54, that are more likely to say that. And we also know that these are the groups that having the most financial stress today. They are dealing with mortgages, dealing with lifestyle changes of kids, looking after parents, a whole range of those things. Or there, if you're 25 to 34, you're more likely trying to figure out how do I get in to the housing market. And then the other group that's very high in this is low income Canadians. So, that this whole notion that, if you play Monopoly, the rich get richer, there's a real chance here that the rich are going to get healthier, right? They're going to have the wherewithal to access things and get a hold of health services. And if we thought we had splintered societies before, Diane, as per your conversation, imagine what that looks like if those gaps become real and we start to see, poor neighborhoods where the life expectancy is much lower than rich neighborhoods. So really, it's incumbent upon us all, if we want to have a strong society, to figure out how to close that gap and make sure that those things get knitted back together as much as we can. A couple of cool signals that we're looking at. This first one is really about a company, taking advantage or, filling the market need for people saying, I want more control over my health. 100 lab tests to live 100 years, $499 US. You get an opportunity or a ability to get in and get those tests quickly that you want to sort of like work through and make sure that you stay on top of things. This is great for, again, people who have money, but people who want control, and for people and we know this is happening, who are worried about the rationalization of the health system. So if you're going in and going, there's a bunch of tests I think I should get because I've looked for information online and they tell me I need X, Y, Z, but my doctor's not going to give them all because I don't necessarily know the requires. Well, for $500 US, I can go get those tests and I can get my own confidence up. So that's someone meeting the market. This next one is about governments and tech, in this case, Google, really trying to close that gap that I talked about with lower educated Canadians. No need for an exact search term or exact search term. You can actually just talk into it and describe your issues, your health concern in a conversational way, get access to health information, health tech resources, closes the gap for those people with lower health literacy. In an ideal world, it actually allows the government to move resources from that triage side, the admin side of health, into service and protection. So it can actually be a beneficial all the way around. More people get in, more people get service. Great, great example. I know, Charles, you talked about the tech angst, but here's an example where tech really can, if it works well, solve some problems. And then finally, another government initiative, food labeling. And we talked about this in climate change, the desire of people to have more information about how companies are performing on the climate. In this case, this is nutritional labels at point of purchase for anything that contains more than 15% of the suggested daily value of fat, sodium, sugar. I think about brands that have, pulled people to the store based on emotion, based on tradition, suddenly being faced with a label that compares what's good for you, what's not good for you across products, right there in your face, fact to fact to fact, and the changes that that's going to drive. So there's some real examples of how things are already happening and moving forward. And if we go to the next one, please, I think there's obviously some clear things to consider for brands and for governments and everybody else, right? How do we help people navigate? How do we deal with what's potentially an even more unequal space? Who's going to be the keeper of all this information, the trusted source, right? We know there's misinformation, we know there's doubts in the world, but who's going to be? And then for those who sit and think, you know what, it's sort of a government and a system social problem less than a business problem. Well, healthier populations, healthier group of employees are more productive, therefore good for growth, and healthier populations cost less in terms of treatment. Prevention costs less than treatment. So the more health information we get out there, the healthier we stay, the more cost savings we have on the back end. So net, it's good for people, it's good for society, it's good for economies. It's something that we need to be focused on. I don't have a neat segue, Charles, to
Nope, that's
individualism,
fine.
other than you're one of my favorite individuals.
we had excellent segues at the beginning, and then as we moved through, they tend to fall apart a little bit. But that's no problem. This is the last trend we want to take you through quickly. And one of the reasons why it's at the end is you can actually see threads of this exist through all of the other trends that we've talked about so far. So some of this will now start to maybe feel a little bit familiar. This is this notion of agency or autonomy that really is coming out clearly these days because there's this prevalent feeling that the world around us continues to collapse. And we're trying to withdraw into ourselves to find whatever that baseline grounding of power is, we can actually impact ourselves and affect some change. And so there's a kind of a diminishment of our personal control and autonomy. And we frame that as an escape to individualism. The escape part is important because we're trying to withdraw from the horror of the world. And of course, where you end up with is the individual, which is probably the last thing or the only thing that we feel that we do have some control over. So it's a multifaceted trend. We see it sort of play out in a lot of choices. 77% of Canadians we asked said it's up to everybody to work out their own set of principles to guide their decisions. No longer taking direction from the mass, from the society or culture around them. It's now up to them, and they're going to decide how they're going to live and the decisions that they're going to make to affect themselves. So some extra numbers with that. The context, of course, as I mentioned, is everything is moving far, far too quickly for us to really feel we've got a handle on it. We don't like that. It's not comfortable. It's not a happy place to be. 76% of Canadians all agree that the world today is changing too fast. Not that it's changing quickly, but it's actually changing too quickly. We've tipped over into a discomfort level there. And 53%, so a little over half of us agree, I wish I could slow down the pace of my life, including, interestingly, 66% of our youngest cohort, the 16 to 34-year-olds, who you might think intuitively would embrace the crazy energy, chaos of the world around us. No, not so. They're actually not overwhelmingly, but impressively and notably concerned with the pace of their life and actually already wishing that things could slow down. Interestingly, only 34% of the 55 to 74s want to slow down their life, and maybe it's because they're already pretty slow to begin with. Certainly can relate to that personally. Half of us, 52%, feel that we often feel overwhelmed by our choices in life. And overwhelmed, again, is a word that suggests that we have tipped over some barrier from comfort into discomfort. These are uncomfortable statements that people are agreeing with. Right, so what else is there then if we're looking for autonomy and agency and satisfaction? Where are we going to find fulfillment in life? Once upon a time, a big part of personal fulfillment had to do with your career and the position that you achieved in whatever organization you were working for. So we asked people that. To what degree is that still true for you? You can see Canada there with the burgundy bar well into the bottom third of this chart, where, interestingly, most of the North American and European countries are sitting. So there we are, close to Bulgaria, New Zealand, Great Britain, France, Japan. We're very much in that part. Only 41% of us feel that having a well-titled career is part of our personal satisfaction. We are at the opposite end of the spectrum from countries like India, Pakistan, and Nigeria. At 81, 80, and 79% respectively, all of whom still feel that having a big job title in your career is a big part of personal fulfillment. I couldn't leave this slide by calling out our favorite, which of course is the Netherlands. The Netherlands, which is only 16% identify having a good job title and a career as part of personal fulfillment, and 80% of them have already thrown that out the number. I think it's the only Scandinavian company we have in this list, so it's almost a proxy for that whole part of the world, where clearly they've moved well beyond placing any real social importance around career path or job titles. So another key numbers here, where then are we going if not our career, if we're not finding fulfillment and personal joy and satisfaction in our job titles, where is that then going to come from? 58% of us agree that new and positive sources of inspiration from unexpected places are the kind of things that we're looking for. And that includes almost 70% of 16 to 34-year-olds, which is a pretty hefty number. Travel is also a big part of that. 58% of us would like to experience living in different parts of the world in order to broaden our horizons. Again, 71% of 16 to 34-year-olds keen to leave the nest and get out into the world. And then lastly, of course, fascinatingly, 66% are interested in learning survival skills to become more self-efficient, including 75% of that younger cohort, which seems to be to us a pretty clear indication that they see the apocalypse looming closely on the horizon. Here are some of the market signals we're looking at. The slow living movement, hashtag slow living, still very much alive. This really focuses on mindfulness and slowing down, and of course, putting your screen and your Instagram in a box locked away. On the rise, of course, is Canadian entrepreneurship. So 51% of Canadians are considering starting their own business in order to be their own boss and bring autonomy and agency back into their own hands. And digital nomadism, which is this idea that you can work from anywhere as long as you've got a strong enough Wi-Fi connection. It was, I think, something that came out into the world even before COVID, but certainly came into its own very much in COVID because of our work from home policies. But it hasn't gone away post-COVID. It's still very much an idea that you can now go and do both things. You can have your interesting job in your career, and you can still do it from the beach in Bali, and then have the best of all of those worlds together.
I think, Charles, I want to have my Canadian entrepreneurial job while I'm living someplace else and also living a slow life. Can I do all three of those together?
I see a Bora Bora overwater bungalow in your future, Diane. I
No,
do. As
excellent.
long as you're right
May
about it, I
solve
think you're.
solve some of your mental health stress too, right?
So last slide before we hand it over to Diane for a wrap up. Again, just how do we look at this as marketers? I think it's pretty straightforward. Clearly, there's a very strong drive in Canadians to explore that aspect of their life. So how can we help people explore and express their own individuality and enable them to actually exercise the agency and autonomy that they so much desire in their life?
Wow, you guys, thank you so much. Charles, every time you speak, I'm just astounded by what you bring to any conversation, and I've loved doing this with you. And Mike, I know why clients turn to you to talk about their sustainability goals and priorities and initiatives. You are the top of the class in this. So thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge, both of you. I do have a couple of final thoughts to share with you. Just as we start to think forward, I think it's really important to recognize that future prepared organizations outperform the average by 33% higher profitability and 200% higher growth. You know, we spend, all of us, we count ourselves included, Charles, Mike, myself, we are so busy working in the day to day, hammering out those to-do lists, everything we need to do, but it is essential to carve out time to think about, talk about, and work session on what's happening down the road. And however you do that in your work life, whether that is carving out an hour every Friday or setting up a one-day offsite for your team every quarter, you need to find time to think about the future. Because it's coming and it's coming fast, and it matters for companies that are thinking about that and really getting ahead. We can help support you, obviously, with our team from Ipsos and Ipsos Strategy 3 through strategic work, activating our trends with your teams and strategy workshops. We can help with other insights. We can help with data access and help you drill down from our 9 trends to your focus areas. So lots of opportunities to really dig into this data and use it in a meaningful level and take it away. You can also download the presentation from today. There's a PDF right on the GoToWebinar control panel, so you can download it from there. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions, if you need anything else. Again, I'm Diane Ridgway-Cross here at Ipsos. Mike, Charles, thank you for everything. You've been a delight to spend an hour with.
Thank you
Our
very
pleasure,
much.
Diane. Thank
Have
you.
a great